Step right up and grab your tickets here, kiddies, and welcome to the Carnival of Souls.
How is it going, everyone, and welcome to the very first 15 Phenomenal Facts video of the Halloween season, and today we're going to be talking about what's been called the greatest horror film that you've never seen, Carnival of Souls. This atmospheric and surreal independent film is something ripped straight out of your nightmares. A relatively unknown film at the time, it's gained quite the cult status over the years, and it's one of my personal favorites from that era. Today we're going to be looking at some of the most interesting facts about this illustrious film that maybe some of the most hardcore fans don't know. And as always, there are a plethora of amazing facts about this film, so if I missed any out, let me know down in the comment section below. But for right now, strap yourselves in, sit back, and relax as we take a ride through Carnival of Souls 15 Phenomenal Facts. Well, let's just get this out of the way right at the beginning. What is with that creepy carnival? Well, it's called the Great Saltaire, and it resides right on the edge of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. If its haunting exterior wasn't enough for you, it has quite the spooky history. The original Saltaire was built in 1893 by church leaders, and was meant to provide a safe and wholesome atmosphere for the community. That structure burnt down in 1925 and was rebuilt on a much larger scale, with a more expansive amusement park and a grand dance hall where bands would play. However, this version failed to gain the popularity of the original Saltaire, and after partially burning down yet again in 1931 and ongoing financial problems during World War II, it eventually closed its doors in 1958. During this closure is when Carnival of Souls was shot in the early 60s. Then, as fate would have it, the Saltaire burned down yet again in 1967. It was rebuilt yet again in the 1980s, where soon after, Salt Lake's water levels rose drastically and the entire place was flooded. Then in 1993, the building was remodeled one more time, and that's the version that stands today. And it's still in use as a small venue for musical acts. So you can still technically visit the Great Saltaire today, but it isn't anywhere close to the original version you see on screen. The dilapidated 60s version was the perfect backdrop for Carnival of Souls. But how did the filmmakers discover the spooky Saltaire in the first place? Well, for number 14, it was discovered by the director when he was on a road trip. That's right, when he was driving back from vacationing in California to his hometown in Kansas, director Herc Harvey was awestruck when he passed the Great Saltaire on his way through Salt Lake City. The whole place just looked weird, he said, and he just cataloged it away in his memory until he could find something to do with it. When he made it home from his road trip, he told his good friend John Clifford about the spooky Saltaire and how the two of them just had to shoot a film there. He pitched John the final scene of a bunch of ghouls dancing in the spectacular ballroom, and John took that idea and created the general story around it. So between the two of them, the seeds for Carnival of Souls were born. The story they came up with is a surreal, dreamlike experience, which sort of feels like a lost episode of The Twilight Zone, and even draws many similarities to the episode The Hitchhiker, but does deviate enough where it still feels incredibly fresh, even for the time. In the film, our lead is haunted by a ghost-faced creature known only as the Man. But who is this man? For number 13, did you know that director Herc Harvey portrays this ghostly character? Hitchcock isn't the only director who gives himself cameos, because our director himself adorns the ghoulish makeup to become this creepy creature. Harvey explains that it was part ego, but it was mostly for economic reasons. When you're working with a limited budget, it's understandable why he would want to just play the role himself, rather than having to pay another actor to do it. Harvey also masterminded the character's iconic look by using white grease paint on his face and wet salt in his hair, which gave him a crusty, long dead appearance. Hey, when you've only got a small amount of cash, you've gotta get thrifty and try to get by on just skin and bones. In fact, they were even working with a skeleton crew. For number 12, it was an extraordinarily small crew. If you know anything about filmmaking, you know that it takes a village. Well, I guess in this case, Carnival would be more appropriate. But Herc Harvey's crew only consisted of 5 other people besides himself. This, of course, doesn't include the cast, and some other people helped down the line with editing and marketing and things of that nature. But as far as the on-set crew, they were making do with just the bare basics. Fortunately for them, with so few people on set, it was easy to stealthily film without people noticing. For number 11, it was a pioneer of guerrilla-style filmmaking. As I mentioned, they were able to get a lot done with very little, and were able to film in some of these locations without being detected. Probably the most famous story about this is the scene featuring Mary in the department store. After being denied permission to shoot there, the crew decided to just go ahead and try to do it anyway and hope that they don't get caught. They ended up slipping one of the employees $25 to just turn the other cheek and let them get what they needed without letting anyone know. This is just one example of how they filmed without being noticed, but what about some of the bigger scenes where you just have to make your presence known? For number 10, let's talk about that bridge scene. It's pretty hard to discreetly destroy a bridge and drive a car off it, right? So Harvey and the gang had to get proper permission for this one. The scene was shot on the Caw Bridge in Eudora, Kansas, and was actually the first day of shooting. Harvey was surprisingly granted permission rather easily, having promised he would cover the damages for the bridge, and that he and his team would also remove the car quickly from the lake once the shot was completed. The scene went off without a hitch, and Harvey ended up receiving a bill for a whopping $17 for the bridge repair. Hey, I guess it pays off shooting for cheap in Kansas. Try getting a bridge repaired in LA for that price, even at the time. The director's home state of Kansas was not only the home of this iconic shot, but also what is perhaps the most iconic shot in the film. For number 9, we're talking about the ghouls rising from the water. If you've seen any clip from Carnival of Souls, it's most likely this one. It's one of the most influential and iconic sequences in all of horror history. But did you know that the shot wasn't actually filmed in Salt Lake, but rather in a small apartment complex swimming pool in Lawrence, Kansas, right around the corner from the director's house, in fact? As I said, it's a very memorable and important scene, and we're very fortunate it made it into the final cut of the film, and wasn't lost or damaged like one of the other film reels were. It's unfortunate that fact number 8 is actually that there is some lost footage due to it being damaged. According to director Herc Harvey, one whole reel of footage was ruined when it was being processed for editing. It's not like today where everyone has a backup, and a backup of the backup. Back then, especially given the budget, you have what you have. Supposedly, the missing footage is a long series of shots featuring the ghouls slowly appearing from behind the rotting docks on the flats, and slowly walking across the prairie to the ballroom, leading into the dancing scene. I guess on the bright side, it wasn't like they lost any crucial plot points or anything, but it would have been nice to see these shots bridging some of the gaps in the film. It's sad that we'll never be able to see these missing segments, but if you really want to subject yourself to it, you could check out some of the film's remakes. For number 7, that's right, despite its relative obscurity, there are actually 2 remakes of Carnival of Souls. The first one was in the 90s, once Carnival of Souls became much more mainstream. As with all horror films that get popular, you just gotta make a remake and cash in. This remake was actually produced by Wes Craven and stars Larry Miller of all people. Yes, that Larry Miller. What a strange casting choice. Judging by its whopping 3.1 rating on IMDb, it wasn't much of a hit. There was also an unofficial remake in 2008 under the title Yella from Germany. From what I've gathered, it's loosely based on the original and actually was decently received by audiences and critics. Actress Candice Hilligoss from the original film was actually offered a cameo in the 90s remake, but understandably wanted no part of it. In fact, she actually previously pitched the idea for a follow-up to the original film instead of remaking it. For number 6, there was almost a sequel. In the late 1980s, Candice Hilligoss actually wrote a treatment for what she wanted to turn into a sequel for the original film. She took it to respected producer Peter Sobey Jr., and instead of taking Candice up on her offer, he instead decided to be one of the bigwigs to spearhead the 1998 remake. So yeah, it's pretty obvious why she chose to have no part in appearing in the remake. It's clear that the original film is very close to her heart, and it's easily what she's best known for. But it almost wasn't that way at all because she almost didn't take the part. For number 5, it's Candice Hilligoss's Difficult Decision. An up-and-coming actress in New York at the time, the then 20-year-old was discovered by director Herc Harvey and was offered the leading role of Mary Henry. However, Hilligoss had already been offered another role in what would eventually become 1963's horror film Violent Midnight. But eventually she opted for Harvey's offer for the role in Carnival of Souls instead. And obviously in the end it all turned out well for her because Carnival of Souls is her magnum opus. And the film that she was almost in, Violent Midnight, is even more obscure than the slightly less obscure film that she did appear in. Carnival of Souls may be a cult classic today, but at the time, it wasn't appreciated. For number 4, its original theatrical release was a box office flop. After the film's humble premiere in 1962, it ended up being shown as the second part of a double feature in drive-ins and didn't make much of a splash financially. In fact, the distributing company even shortened the film by about 7 minutes in order to fit in more showtimes, but it didn't help with anything. However, years later, between screenings in art house cinemas in Europe and subsequent airings on late-night television, it began to gain a strong underground following. Nowadays, it's regarded as a landmark in psychological horror, and I'm thankful that most of the cast and crew was still around to see its success. Coming up at number 3, Herc Harvey and the rest of the major players were still alive to see their hard work become recognized. In early 1989, a new distributing company re-released the film in theaters across the US and in film festivals in New York, Dallas, among other major cities. The critical response this time around was ecstatic and received glowing reviews in major news publications, and was even featured on television shows such as Siskel and Ebert. Herc Harvey and John Clifford even received Life Achievement Awards from the Kansas Film Institute, and along with some of the actors were able to attend screenings and do Q&As. And yes, Herc Harvey showed up in character. It's clear that Herc is synonymous with the film, and part of what makes it so unique is that it's the only feature film from Herc Harvey. For number 2, this was the only feature film that Herc Harvey ever finished. There's a common misconception that this is the only feature that he worked on, and that's only slightly true. Discouraged by the apparent failure of Carnival of Souls and busy with work assignments, Harvey never directed another feature, though he did make several aborted attempts. One was a comedy called Flanagan's Smoke, and another was a science fiction called The Reluctant Witch. Shooting for the latter film actually did start, but it wasn't long before they ran out of money and ultimately shut down the production. Some unedited footage of the film still survived, but it wasn't much. Harvey also wrote a screenplay for a historical film called Windwagon, but nothing ever really came of it. The fact that Carnival of Souls is a standalone piece with none of the major players going on to do anything else significant, it really does add to the film's mystique. It truly has stood the test of time, and its staying power can be seen in the films in which it inspired. For number 1, many films have taken Carnival of Souls as inspiration. It's incredibly easy to see the influence that it had on the film industry, even as early as 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. This is probably one of the clearest examples of its influence, but it doesn't stop there. We can clearly see its hypnotic power stretched to all kinds of films, like David Lynch's pasty-faced mystery man from Lost Highway, and even in films like Insidious with the white-faced creatures in The Further. You can pull similarities with The Sixth Sense, and that famous water scene in particular can be seen clear as day in films like Land of the Dead, and I'd argue that its influence even spread to films like Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. So through Hell or High Water, this eerie, atmospheric, and psychological story has permeated through the generations, and hopefully the Carnival of Souls will still be welcoming guests for generations to come. Well, that is about it for this time, guys. I hope you enjoyed my 15 phenomenal facts about Carnival of Souls. What are some of your favorite facts about the film, and what is your favorite public domain horror? Let me know down in the comments section below. And if you guys haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you know when I come out with new videos. And if you were to give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend, it would be greatly appreciated. That's it for this time, guys. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another video from the House of Horror, and as always, take care and stay spooky.